Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third in our series of web chats about ancient civilizations. This is the third and final web chat, and today we're focusing on the Maya. I'm your moderator, Kristin Lehner from PBS LearningMedia, and I'm here today with Allison Davis, who is a cultural property researcher in the Cultural Heritage Center at the U.S. Department of State. Allison has conducted archaeological research in Peru for 15 years and also excavated in Italy and the United States. She holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of Michigan and has taught at Oberlin College and Brown University. And her research here at the State Department, she's especially interested in helping to reduce looting and the illicit trafficking of cultural artifacts in Latin America. So today we're also joined by the School Without Walls here in Washington, D.C., and the Centro Cultural Sampedrano in San Pedro Sula, Honduras. So I want to turn it over to Allison now to talk a little bit more about what we're going to be doing today, and then very shortly we will hear from students at both schools.
Great, thanks Kristin, and hello to both schools. The School Without Walls in Washington, D.C. has read part of a creation story from the Popol Vuh, part of a Maya creation story. And so what we're going to do today is try to understand a little bit why that story is available for them to read. And we're going to do that by talking about writing and how it's different in different cultures and different times and places. And before we got here, all of the students practiced writing their birthdays in Maya glyphs. So we're going to use that experience to compare writing in Maya times with how we write today. So the first thing we'll do is hear a little bit from the students about their experience, and then I'll talk more about Maya writing both before the Spanish conquest and during Spanish conquest, and there'll be time at the end then to answer some questions.
So first we'd like to go to students from the Centro Cultural Sampedrano.
Morning. Can you hear us? Hello. Good. Hello.
I can hear you. Okay. Great. So we have a couple of questions for the students.
Hi, Centro Cultural Sampedrano. The questions that we have for you, we'd like to ask you to describe your experience writing in Maya glyphs and compare that. What are the similarities and differences to the way that you normally write? As part of that question, please include what are the most common topics that you write about today, and we'll use that to compare later with some of the Maya writing we talk about.
El micrófono está bien. Sí, no hay realizarlo en el teléfono.
Oh, there you go.
No, aquí abajo debe de tener un parlantillo, y si en la computadora está en mute, por eso no se escucha. Subirlo.
Great. We're going to go and take questions from the School Without Walls first, and then come back to the Centro Cultural Sampedrano. So, yeah, School Without Walls.
So it's the same question because we're going to compare our experiences between Washington, D.C. and the Centro Cultural Sampedrano. So please, School Without Walls, tell me what your experience was like writing in Maya glyphs and how it's similar or different to the way that you write in your day-to-day life now, and also tell me some of the most common things you write about.
Well, I mean, I kind of traced it, the glyphs for my birthday, and it seemed harder to write in hieroglyphs than it does now, considering there's so much detail in just the one symbol, and there's also a lot of drawing, and you have to make sure that it doesn't look the same as the other ones did, so it's sort of complicated. But also with that, in the packet, it says that they used the hieroglyphs to write down the numbers and the words and sort of like inventory. And right now, well, as I know with our generation, right now we usually write about our lives, especially on social media. And I mean, it's sort of different, but it's sort of similar considering inventory, you write about what's there and what's not, and sort of in lot, we write about that now. We also write about our lives, so yeah. I'm done.
They were here.
Póngale en el chat. Póngale en el chat. Check our system. Miss, can you hear us? If you can hear us, we checked our system and all is good here. We're not getting sound from you.
Only make it worse.
I don't know what is happening. The internet is not connected.
Okay.
Let's just go with the connection. It's all right, Cable.
Okay,
Do you want me to take over as camera person? That'd be great. Yeah, I think just a live chat for right now. And for some reason, I think
The video is connected through there. We're not getting video on our side. Let's see. Cancel. Here we go. Okay, we're back on video.
Oh, and we can't even see Jen. Just sweet. Which is good.
Okay. Let's just see. It sounds like they maybe.
It's possible that they're hearing everything we're saying. Well, no, good.
Okay.
Well, especially when you're like,
When
"What?"
you're- Great. So hello again, everyone. So sorry for the technical difficulties. If you could please type your responses to Allison's questions into the chat box. We'll be sure to read those out loud. And while you're typing, we'll talk a little bit about this here.
So, Kristin,
Yes.
you started talking a little bit about what topics you normally write about day to
Yeah.
day. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah. So as a content editor at PBS LearningMedia, I write a lot of email.
Mhm.
So letters are similar to emails, but I think not exactly similar. So I spend a lot of my day communicating with contributors to the website about the kinds of content they're going to be contributing. I also write email letters to my friends, which feel a little bit more like letters. I have a couple of friends that I correspond with who don't live in the United States, so we write letters back and forth to each other. Text messages is another way that I communicate a lot throughout the day with people. The writing, I think, is very different than I do writing emails for work or longer letters to my friends on email.
And what's the physical experience of writing? How do you actually use your body to write?
Because I grew up using computers, I have a very specific way that I sort of like to be sitting at a desk. I don't use a standing desk. I use a sitting desk. I like to be sitting at my desk. And I learned touch typing in 6th grade. My mom sent me to touch typing school. So, I put my hands on the keyboard and then I go. And I like to be able to type fast and not look at the keyboard and look at somebody while I'm typing and get a lot out there.
Right. So that's a good description, I think, of a lot of the modern ways that we write, and that we do type a lot. When I write, I type mostly, sometimes on a cell phone, sometimes on a keyboard. I also like to use a pencil, and I tend to write cursive and not print. And so those are all different ways that we write today. And I'll refer back to some of those experiences when we compare to Maya writing. Okay, so I think we'll just go ahead and move to start talking more about Maya writing, look more closely at the system itself, and we'll use some slides and some real examples to do that. Okay, so starting out with something really basic, we just have to think about what the Maya symbols are comprised of, or what they consist of. And Maya glyphs are really often a combination of some symbols or signs that stand for entire words, and some that stand for syllables. And so if you look at the image that's on the screen, we have the Maya glyph for, it's a compound glyph, actually, but there are two images that stand for whole words. If you look on the right, you have balam, which is the word for jaguar, and it looks like the picture of a jaguar head. It stands for the whole word. On top of the cat's head, you see a bird, yakshun, which is a symbol that stands for a whole word. And then if you look on the left, you have a syllable, ya. So that's a combination of a consonant and a vowel. And on the bottom, there's another syllable, which is ma. And again, it's a combination of a consonant and a vowel. If you think about that compared to the way that we write, we use an alphabet where each symbol really, for the most part, only stands for a single sound, either a consonant or a vowel, instead of a syllable, which is, again, that combination of a consonant with a vowel. If we look at the next slide here, it seems to be a little messed up, but what we want to talk about is the order that Maya writing is arranged and the order in which you would read the Maya writing. So symbols are most commonly arranged in two columns, although there is some variety in that. And they're read left to right and then top to bottom. And you can see an example here from Copan, which many of you in Honduras might have seen, and maybe some of you in Washington will see someday. It's Stella P. And you can see the writing on what you'll see is the left side of that monument. It's in two columns, and again, you would read it left to right and top to bottom. And in some ways, that's similar to the way that we write. We also write and read from left to right, from top to bottom, but we are very happy to fit as many characters as possible across every line, and we don't just stick to 2 per line. So that's a major difference that you'd see. Another important thing to know about Maya writing is that it was flexible. So any particular word could be represented a number of different ways. And when you look at this slide, we see 5 different ways that you can write balam, or jaguar. And that's the same glyph that we saw on the first image. So if you look at the first one on the left, you have just a jaguar head. And that symbol stands for the entire word, balam. And then if you move to the right, you can see another way to write the same word, where you have the jaguar head, and that's a word, but on the left you have the symbol for the syllable ba. And really that's just trying to complement and add a little information to the reader. It's still the same word, balam. If you move to the right again, you have balam, jaguar, but this time you have the image for the whole word plus the complement of ma, which is the last sound in the word. We move to the bottom row. Things are getting very complicated because you have the image for jaguar complemented by the first syllable and the last syllable. And then finally, moving to the bottom right, this is an entirely phonetic writing of the same word. So we no longer have a picture of a jaguar head that directly shows a jaguar head. And instead we have 3 syllables that put together say the whole word, ba-lam. And this is an important feature of Maya writing because the flexibility and the creativity that you could use to write was actually a feature that was really valued. And only a small subset of Maya people were able to read or write because of this complexity. And they were elite scribes. And part of what they were doing was also engaging creativity and artistry and distinguishing their writing from others. So that when you see Maya hieroglyphs at one site or another, you could see the very same thing written a lot of different ways. And it's not meant to be read or written by that many people. If we contrast that to the way that we write, I think all of you students, and I certainly spent a lot of my time growing up in school learning standardized ways to write certain words, and they had to be spelled correctly, and we took a lot of tests. And I spent a lot of time trying to make my handwriting look like everyone else's, which for me personally was a struggle, and that might be true for some others as well. So
do you want to, we got a couple of responses from the School Without Walls and Centro Cultural Sampedrano about how they've written in their experience writing Maya glyphs.
Yeah, I think now is a great time to take a break and hear from that before we go and talk a little bit more about the context and the topics of Maya writing.
Mm-hmm. So we have a response from School Without Walls, where one of the students says that writing in Maya glyphs was a challenge. For something simple as my birthday was a struggle. I had to trace the glyphs after many tries free-handed. Today our letters are way simpler than the glyph of the Mayans. When I'm not writing for humanities, I usually, which is the class, I usually write about my life, especially on social media. And then we have another response from the Centro Cultural Sampedrano. We're pulling it up right now. So my experience writing glyphs was pretty interesting. Like, it was something new and exciting. To be honest, I even thought you have to have lots of patience. But the student says that I would do it again without hesitating.
Great. So those are great responses, and I think it highlights what we're talking about here. Again, with this complicated system of writing, there's a lot of flexibility. It's an elaborate way to express things. You know, again, in Maya society, it was really a small group of people who were able to write and able to read, and it was meant to be that way. And that's very different from our writing, because everyone is meant to read and write in a standardized way, and that's so that it's easy for us to read quickly. And really, both in Honduras and the United States, we have a goal of everyone being able to read and write, and it's really important for everyday functioning in your life, whether it's to do your schoolwork or to communicate with your friends in a very short-term way. It's really a much more universal task. So let's return to the slides. And we'll talk a little bit more about the content of Maya writing and some of the context that it was happening in. Most of pre-Columbian Maya writing took place in a context where there was a society that really placed a lot of importance on rulers and their inherited right to rule. And this is an image that we're looking at of a monument from Copan. And it has the 16 rulers of Copan. There are 4 on each side. Each of the rulers is seated on their name glyph, except for the one that you see in the center left here, which is simply seated on the word Lord. And that person is the original founder of the ruling dynasty. And they're facing the ruler who commissioned the construction of this object, and it's the current ruler. And what's happening is that the founder of the dynasty is literally handing over the right to rule to the current ruler. And so that's a symbol of the legitimacy of that person and their right to rule. If we look at another example, this is also from Copan. And this is an example of one of many monuments that are really meant to record significant events and dates from a ruler's life. This particular one was commissioned by Washaklahun Uba Kawil, and he was the 13th ruler of Copan. And this monument is meant to mark the end of the first Katun, or a period of 7,200 days, after he ascended to the throne and the right to rule. And the date we know in the Gregorian calendar is December 5th, 711 AD. A lot of Maya writing really was commissioned by rulers to mark these events. And that's why, part of the reason why it wasn't just the information that was being transmitted, but also the beauty and the artistry that went along with the writing itself. Since a lot of monuments and writing do typically involve dates, that's why I ask all of you to practice writing your birthday. And so, in fact, you've practiced one of the most common things that was ever written down by the pre-Columbian Maya. And although we don't have time to really master the calendar today, I want to tell you a little bit about how it works, and so that you could maybe go back to your classes, swap birthdays with a classmate, and do the counterpart to writing, which is trying to practice reading Maya glyphs. You could read each other's birthdays. I think we'll wait for the image here, because without it, it's slightly difficult to describe. But we can start by saying that the Maya had a system for long counts, where they had a base date, that was August 13th, 3114 BC, and then they used a system to count forward in time from that date to establish the date in which events took place. And because they had that absolute starting date, we're able to link up the Maya calendar dates with our own dates and then sort of convert them, which is what you did before class. I will ask you to imagine your birthday that you wrote, or perhaps you have your birthday with you, in front of you, or you can kind of remember the website and what it looked like with the two columns of glyphs going down. And several of those glyphs, oh great, starting from the top, the ones that are not in bold, are units of days that are used to count forward from that base date. So you have the largest, which is Baktun, 144,000 days. Then you have the Katun, which is 7,200 days, the Tun of 360 days, Winal of 20 days, and just the Kin of 1 day. And those numbers might look a little odd to us, but the Maya used a base 20 counting system. So they're all multiples of 20, and they're numbers that made sense within that system. Each of those units also has next to it a number. And the numbers, I think you'll find when you go back, are actually the easiest things to read because they're the bars and dots. So that each of those vertical bars stands for 5, and each of the dots stands for 1. So in this example, we could look at the Baktun and see that there are 2 vertical bars, so that's 5 plus 5 is 10, plus 2 dots is 12. And then you would multiply 12 by 144,000 days. I'm trying to remember if I did this. Not for that one specifically, so I can't count forward, but from there. But maybe if we go down to a smaller unit, like the Winal, that's just a unit of 20 days. It's easier for us to think about. And so there are 3 units of 20 days, or 60 days. And you could count forward, if that were the only thing you had to add, from August 13th, 3114, which would put you, Kristin, at maybe October 12th, I would guess. Also in the same year, 3114. So you can all go back and you can practice counting forward and do the math, figure that out. But there's another section of the calendar as well that isn't used to count forward. So it's not used to establish an absolute date and time. And that starts with the second from the bottom Solkin date. And the Solkin is actually a ritual calendar that's 260 days long. And that calendar is used to schedule rituals, to understand when to start planting corn, to pick auspicious days for weddings, to establish traditional Maya names, things like that. If you move to the lower row, you have the Hab, which is a solar calendar of 365 days. And that's like our calendar, so it tracks the solar year. And then finally, the last symbol is the Lord of the Night, which is one of the 9 Maya lords of the underworld, which is also used to mark a particular day. So I know that's a complicated system, and we don't have time to really practice much more and look into it, but I would encourage you to swap with a friend and try it out for yourselves after. Let's try to read each other's birthday. Okay. The last image of a pre-Columbian Maya text that I wanted to show is this bark paper book. So the Maya did have a tradition of writing on paper as well, not just creating monuments with beautiful writing on them. And you can see that this image is much more complex. It's longer than what you would see on a stone monument, but it's still really just an outline of dates that mark events. Maybe you have rulers' names, and there are often illustrations to be a key about what this story is about. But what it's meant to do really is serve as an aid for a storyteller or someone who's reciting a poem, who's then going to orally fill in the extra information. So that's a really important point to compare to the way that you write today. We write in a narrative form, usually, where we don't expect the reader to have to know any outside information or have to fill in any gaps, but rather everything we want them to know is written down and they're able to read it. So that's a really important contrast that we see. And it might lead you to ask how then we have the Popol Vuh in its complete narrative form that's available for students to read, not just in the US or Honduras, but anywhere in the world. And to understand that, we really have to think about the context in which that Popol Vuh was written down. It's important to know that far before the Spanish arrived, by about 900 AD, that system of rulers that ruled based on lineage and the inherited right to rule, that system had already been replaced by a rulership that was done by councils. So we don't have those monuments being written anymore at Maya sites. We do still have bark paper books, but that system has sort of gone away. When the Spanish arrive in the 16th century, priests who come with the Spanish are really involved in a process of conversion of indigenous people. And in the case of the Maya, that conversion included the destruction of almost all of those bark paper manuscripts. So almost all of the books that were written in original Maya script were lost and were destroyed because, from the priest perspective, they were trying to eliminate indigenous religions and replace them with Catholicism. So it was really in that context that some Maya elite learned to write in European alphabet. And they started to write down their stories in narrative form, still in Maya languages, but using European letters. And that's why we have these narrative stories preserved today. Now, these books were still kept in secret. They knew that if the Spanish saw them, they would destroy them, just so they had the Maya hieroglyphic books. So they had to keep them closely guarded. And the only reason we really have this book available today is because some Maya in Chichicastenango in Guatemala loaned their copy of the Popol Vuh to a Spanish priest who had somehow gained their trust. And he transcribed it. So he made his own hand copy, and we can see an image of that now. He made a hand copy of the Quiché Maya original Popol Vuh, which you see in the left column, and then he added his own Spanish translation that you see in the right column. And that was done in about 1701 to 1704. We don't know exactly when. And after a long journey through Europe, eventually this document has ended up in the Newberry Library in Chicago. And it's because of that that we're able to read a creation story from the Maya, and this students in the School Without Walls are able to include it in their comparison of creation stories from all over the world. It's now been translated into many languages. We don't have those original transcriptions of the Popol Vuh that were written by the Maya themselves, unfortunately. We only have this copy that was created by a Spanish priest. So that's all I want to tell you about Maya writing, and then we can answer some of the questions that students have.
Yeah, so please, thank you so much for that, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Any questions you have, please type them into the chat box, and we can have Allison answer. So let's look here. How were people, this is a question from the School Without Walls, how were people able to decipher the different glyphs and illustrations?
It was a long process, and you might not be surprised to hear, after what you saw the calendar, that the first thing that people were able to decipher were the numbers. So in the 1830s, someone who was looking at a copy of that Maya bark paper book that you saw, he only had 5 pages, but he was able to work out the pattern that those bars stood for 5 and the dots stood for 1. And that was the first thing that happened. If we move forward in time a little bit further, a scholar in Germany was able to puzzle out those long count dates. And if you think about the steps, how this is happening, it's these things that are repetitive that people are able to decode first. And so he built on knowing the numbers, and then he kept seeing those repetitions of the units in time again and again, and he was able to work out that that was the way to the long count date. But up until that point, people still didn't understand that the Maya glyphs were syllables and words, and most people suspected they were an alphabet like ours that we just couldn't understand yet. It wasn't really until the 1950s that a Russian linguist was able to figure out that it was this complicated combination of syllables and words that were being written down. But even with knowing that, we didn't really know what many of the words were, which is something that's still an ongoing project. And that's really where archaeologists started to help, because when they looked at those monuments, especially, that were still located in archaeological sites, or these ancient cities, they started to notice, for example, that certain names were repeated on several monuments with different dates that were all kind of close together during what might be a human lifespan. And then they started to realize that those repeated names with those events were the names of rulers. And they really were only able to do that because the monuments had remained in the site. If those monuments had been somewhere else, and not all as a set together, we wouldn't have been able to very easily make that advance.
Really interesting. A lot of work by a lot of different people over a very long period of time. We've got another question from the Centro Cultural Sampedrano. Which aspects of Mayan culture do you like the most? And for us in Honduras, what would be the one thing that we have to know about Mayans?
Well, I have to say that I'm not a Maya specialist, and what's really always caught my imagination and interest is the writing. I like reading Maya glyphs. I love teaching students about it. People get very excited, and I like this idea of creativity and artistry that goes along with writing and meaning, and so that's something I really enjoy. The second part of your question is, I think, very difficult to me. What you have to know about the Maya, I just think the most important thing is to understand that there's a long indigenous tradition of, complicated astronomy and important mathematics, that we know we have archaeological evidence of the systems of writing and math and astronomy by 36 BC, but that it continues until today. And so, I always think it's important for students not to think that the Spanish arrive and that's the end of indigenous culture and indigenous traditions. But I think that the students in Honduras already know this very well, I'm guessing. So it's a great question. Thanks.
Great. yeah, we'd love to take more questions, and we have another one from the School Without Walls. Did the Mayans have an outside insight, inspiration, or help when creating their seemingly accurate mathematical calendar?
Well, the Maya are actually great mathematicians, and they were great astronomers. We've already mentioned that they had a base 20 mathematical counting system. They also used 0 by 36 BC, which is very early if we compare it with the rest of the world. And they were really just great astronomers. You probably all realize that the solar year is not exactly 265 days long. There's a fraction of an extra day it takes for the Earth to go around the sun. And the Maya's measuring of that extra fraction was more precise than what we used in Europe at the time. And so a lot of people speculate that at the time Maya mathematics and astronomy were actually the most advanced in the world, which would mean that no one could really have taught them. It would have been the other way around. The only thing I would add is that the Maya writing and the calendar system are the most elaborate that we have, but it is part of a longer Mesoamerican tradition. So when we talk about that date of 36 BC, that date actually comes from a Zapotec site in Mexico. And so there's this longer tradition of dates and calendars and math that goes even before the Maya. So it's not an outside influence, but it's a long tradition.
In that region.
In that region. Yep.
Great. Thanks. So we have another question. What is the significance of the long count calendar cycle reaching, might not say this right, 13.0.0.0.0.0 on December 21st, 2012?
So you had a little trouble reading the 13.0.0.0. That's a shorthand that scholars have developed to not have to write 13 Baktun, 0 Katun, and on with all of those different multiples of 20. Yeah. And the significance then of that number is really just that on what is in our calendar, December 21st, 2012, they reached the end of a Baktun, or the end of one of those cycles of 144,000 days, and the beginning of the next one. And really, that can be compared to the year 2000, which I think many of you were born in, from what I saw from the birthdays you wrote. And that's just the end of one millennium and the beginning of another. You know, the calendar continues. It's the end of a large unit that is meaningful and people celebrate.
Yeah, but people here were certainly very worried about Y2K.
Exactly. You don't remember because we weren't born. But here people were very worried about Y2K for a while, and then some of that concern was also, similar concerns were seen with that cycle of the Maya calendar as well.
So another question from the Centro Cultural Sampedrano. How has the Mayan writing and numbering had influence in today's world?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's drawn a lot of interest. A lot of people who look into mathematics are interested in comparing systems. It's important to remember that for Maya people and ritual specialists, they continue and have always continued to use this calendar to schedule rituals, to give people names. And so we shouldn't think of it as an ancient calendar that modern people might rediscover, but rather as a calendar that's in continuous use in a particular cultural context.
Do we have any more questions? Great. School Without Walls is asking, what caused our modern society to adopt a 365-day cycle similar to the Hab as our calendar and not any of the other cycles that the Maya use, such as a long count calendar cycle or the Tzolk'in calendar?
So our calendar that we use is not that old. It's only from the 16th century. It's called the Gregorian Calendar after a pope named Pope Gregory, who was trying to make improvements over the previous calendar in terms of handling that leap year problem. And his main concern was really that we would be able to accurately schedule Easter. He was very worried about it. But overall, of course, our calendar is a solar calendar just like the Hab. And so the reason that they're similar is because both the European antecedents of our calendar, and Maya people were able to do astronomical observations of the solar year. And so they're really observing the outside world and turning that into a calendar. And we don't use the Tzolk'in, the 260-day calendar, because it is a ritual calendar. And so there are certain rituals that are carried out every 260 days. That calendar can be used to pick an auspicious day for a wedding or a name. And those activities really make sense within the context of living Maya culture, within the context of Maya religion or Maya ritual. And they wouldn't make sense in my daily life because that's not my tradition. We do have ritual calendars as well. We just heard that our own calendar was very concerned with Christian rituals for Easter. But a difference still is that Easter is still calculated based on the solar and lunar events. But the Tzolk'in is not related in any clear way to any astronomical or geophysical or Earth events. So that's a main difference.
Great. Do we have any more questions? So from Centro Cultural Sampedrano, the astronomical sense of the Mayans. Is it useful or applicable today?
Yes. I think, we've talked already a little bit that it was just very accurate. It's the same in many sense as what we use today because we are all observing the same universe. And really, when you look all over the world, in many different places, humans observe the universe, they make sense of it with calendars, and they use it to organize their lives.
Great. So how many Maya glyphs are there?
I suspect this question is impossible to answer. If you think about the way that Maya glyphs work, there's a sort of unending possibility of combinations of syllables and what are called logograms. So I think I'm going to have to say I don't know. I don't know how many are recorded, written down. I don't know if anyone does.
So we have one final question coming up. From the Centro Cultural Sampedrano, would you like to visit us someday and learn more about Copan especially?
I would love to visit. I would love to visit Copan. It's something I've read about and studied for a long time. And I've only ever been to Palenque, one Maya site in my whole life. So I hope that someday I will visit you and meet you. And you can tell me a little bit more about what you know about the site.
Great. Well, I hope that happens one day as well. And I want to thank everyone for joining in and for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. And we're so happy to have done this series of web chats with the School Without Walls and with schools around the world. And thank you especially today to the Centro Cultural Sampedrano for joining us and for creating such an interesting discussion. So again, this is the third and final web chat in our series. So you can go to pbslearningmedia.org to find the recordings of all three web chats. We'll be loading those onto the site shortly in a couple of weeks and gathering a lot of the images that we used in these web chats and putting them with the webinar so that you have an archive and a place to revisit some of these ideas going forward. So thanks, Allison. Thanks again, and thank you.
Thank you. Bye.